Glenn Quagmire, pervert, pest, and surprisingly, one of Family Guy's most complex characters. Yeah, I said it, and I'm far from the only one that thinks so. Far from it. On the surface, he's the giggling, sex-crazed neighbor you'd never let within a mile of your family. But dig a little deeper, and you'll find a character who's evolved more than almost anyone else in Quahog. Somehow, despite his long list of crimes, Quagmire has become essential to the show's DNA. So how does someone so gross still manage to win us over? That's what I'll be trying to answer in this video. No need to sugarcoat it, we're all quite aware of it. Quagmire started off as one of the most morally bankrupt characters in Family Guy. I mean, the man was introduced as a straight-up predator, and that's not even an exaggeration. Quagmire's whole shtick was being the absolute worst. One of his earliest spotlight episodes, Blind Ambition, had him getting caught spying on Lois on the toilet. Yeah, that happened. It almost like the writer said, hey, how far can we push this before the FCC explodes? But here's the thing, you couldn't look away. Somehow his absurd antics were just funny, enough to make you laugh while still cringing. It's a weird balance, but the show owned it. One minute, he's bragging about hooking up with homeless twins. The next, he's accidentally saving a woman's life while trying to be a creep. It's hard to tell if you're supposed to root for him or hope he gets arrested. And let's not forget his famous giggity, that stupid, basically meaningless catchphrase, somehow became iconic. Quagmire was sleazy, unapologetic, and honestly kind of a one-note joke. But back then, that worked. He wasn't meant to be deep, he was just there to push the boundaries of what animated TV could get away with. But that couldn't last forever, right? Because here's the thing, if Quagmire stayed the same, we probably wouldn't even be talking about him today. Characters like him can only stay interesting for so long before they get stale, and slowly but surely, the writers started to peel back the layers, turning the town's resident sleazeball into someone who's, dare I say it, actually complex. As the series progressed, something unexpected happened. Quagmire grew as a character. While most of Quahog's residents devolved into caricatures, I'm looking at you, Peter, Quagmire became more layered, more human. Let's dive into the key moments that shifted him from a punchline to a surprisingly compelling character. One of the first glimpses of Quagmire's depth came in I Take Thee, Quagmire. In this episode, Quagmire falls in love with Peter's maid, Joan, and even marries her.
Will you marry me?
Oh, of course I will. Nothing would make me happier than to be Mrs. Quagmire.
Yes, this is still Family Guy, so naturally their marriage is a train wreck, complete with Joan's obsessive behavior and eventual death. But for a brief moment, we saw a softer side of Quagmire. He wasn't chasing women for one-night stands, he genuinely wanted love and companionship. It's a rare episode that shows his emotional vulnerability, hinting at the complexity beneath the giggity exterior. Then there's Airport 07, which focuses on Quagmire's job as a pilot, revealing his deep passion for flying. When he loses his job after Peter's antics, Peter takes the plane fuel from a plane to refill his car, causing a near-fatal crash. Quagmire spirals into depression. He even moves into the Griffin's treehouse at one point. Treehouses aside, it's honestly refreshing to see a character who's typically defined by his bedroom exploits show dedication and pride in something outside of sex. His work ethic and love for flying add a whole new dimension to his character. He's not just a guy with a revolving door on his bedroom, he's someone who takes his job seriously and has dreams beyond Quahog's bar scene. But arguably, the biggest shift in Quagmire's character came when the writers gave him a bit of an edge. In the later seasons, Quagmire became less easygoing and more irritable, especially with Peter's constant stupidity, and honestly, it's a good look for him.
Yes, we know, you're very well read, but this is poetry we're talking about, and I think when it comes to poetry, you can't be wrong. What, Peter?
Nothing.
In a show where characters are often stuck in their worst habits, Quagmire's evolution stands out. He's still a perv, sure, but he's no longer just the pervert. With every season, the writers peel back another layer, turning Quagmire into one of Family Guy's most complex and interesting characters. So we've talked about Quagmire's outrageous antics and how his horn dog tendencies have defined him since day one. But here's the twist. Not everything about Quagmire is cringeworthy. Beneath all the chaos and questionable ethics, there's an actual human being. A flawed one? Sure. But also one with moments of genuine heart, surprising self-awareness, and even, dare I say it, tenderness. And it's those moments that make him way more interesting than just being the giggity guy. And for starters, let's talk about Quagmire's role as a family man. Now, I know what you're thinking. Quagmire? Family Guy? Isn't this the same guy who built a trap door in his house? Yeah, that guy. But believe it or not, when it comes to his actual family, Quagmire has shown he's got a heart in there somewhere. Take Quagmire's Baby, where Quagmire discovers he has a daughter, Anna Lee, from one of his many, let's call them escapades. And yes, he gives her a wildly inappropriate name for a bad joke, because of course he does, but he struggles with what to do.
Oh, she's a beautiful little girl, Glenn. Have you given her a name yet?
Yeah, I named her Anna Lee, but I'm probably just gonna call her Annal for short.
He knows he's not fit to be a dad. In the end, he makes the hard choice to give her up for adoption so she can have a better life. It's not a perfect resolution, but it's a moment of growth. He puts her well-being above his own ego, which is more than what we can say about how Peter treats any of his kids. Then there's his complicated but touching relationship with Ida, his transgender parent. If you've seen the episode with Quagmire's dad, you'll know how this one starts. Quagmire's initially furious and confused when he finds out his Navy hero dad is transitioning into a woman.
This is not a joke, Peter, okay? They're cutting off his penis in there.
It's an emotional roller coaster, but by the end, he accepts Ida for who she is.
I'm sorry, Dad. I love you.
It's a shockingly heartfelt moment, especially for a show that rarely handles serious topics with subtlety. Quagmire's journey here is one of acceptance and growth, a reminder that even the most ridiculous characters can surprise you. And let's not forget Quagmire's softer side when it comes to animals. In Catfight, Quagmire opens a cafe for felines and at one point even takes 73 cats into his home. But more on that later. The point is, Quagmire has compassion buried underneath all that sleaze. He's a crazy cat man, sure, but it's kind of endearing, isn't it? What makes Quagmire so fascinating is the constant back and forth between his worst impulses and his better nature. One minute, he's saying or doing something unforgivable, the next, he's risking his own happiness to do the right thing. He's the guy who will build a house of horrors in his bedroom, and the guy who'll stand up for his family when they need him most. The contradiction is what makes Quagmire work, and why, for all his faults, he's impossible to forget. Now, let's shift gears and talk about one of Family Guy's most entertaining dynamics, the ongoing feud between Quagmire and Brian. This rivalry is one of the show's more recent additions, but honestly, it's kind of brilliant. On the surface, these two couldn't be more different. Quagmire's impulsive, sleazy, and all about instant gratification, while Brian sees himself as this intellectual, morally superior figure. And yet, they're not so different, are they? The tension between them really kicked off in Jerome is the New Black. In that episode, Peter casually mentions that Quagmire hates Brian, which, let's be honest, seemed to come out of nowhere at the time. But when Brian confronts him, Quagmire doesn't hold back. He delivers one of the most savage monologues in the entire series, listing every reason he despises Brian. His arrogance, his constant freeloading, and, of course, his creepy obsession with Lois.
How can you not like me? Okay, I'll tell you. You are the worst person I know. You constantly hit on your best friend's wife. The man pays for your food and rescued you from certain death, and this is how you repay him? And to add insult to injury, you defecate all over his yard.
And honestly, he's not wrong. Brian has always had a holier-than-thou attitude, but Quagmire calls him out on all of it. It's one of those moments where you're like, wow, this obsessed guy in the Hawaiian shirt actually has a point. But here's where it gets interesting. Their rivalry isn't just a one-sided takedown of Brian, it's also a reflection of Quagmire's own flaws. A lot of the things Quagmire hates about Brian, his selfishness, his hypocrisy, are things Quagmire is guilty of too. It's like they're two sides of the same sleazy coin, and maybe that's why their dynamic works so well. Let's go back to Catfight from season 18 again, because this was a turning point for Brian and Glenn. Quagmire opens a cat cafe to find some purpose in his life, only for Brian to get it shut down because, well, he's a dog and doesn't care for cats very much. He's kinda asserting his dominance. Quagmire gets forced to live with his cats, and not to sugarcoat it, they all end up dying. Quagmire is actually burning the cat corpses when he sees Brian. The two end up brawling in the streets, and it's not just for laughs, it's a real emotional confrontation. Quagmire confesses that the cafe was his way of doing something meaningful, of trying to leave a better legacy behind. For a guy like Quagmire who's done so many questionable things, that's a big deal. What's surprising though is how Brian responds. Instead of brushing it off or doubling down, he actually takes responsibility. He offers to be Quagmire's emotional support animal, and the two of them go for a walk together, like actual friends. It's one of those rare moments where Family Guy steps back from the jokes and lets the characters just be human, or, you know, a human and a dog. Of course, the rivalry isn't all heartwarming moments and resolutions. Sometimes it's just plain funny, like in when Quagmire pays for Brian's dental surgery after the dog smashes his face into a fire hydrant. It's a small act of kindness, but it doesn't stop Quagmire from roasting him mercilessly the entire time, because let's be real, Quagmire is always going to be Quagmire. The Quagmire-Brian feud works because it feels real. They're both deeply flawed characters, but their rivalry forces them to confront those flaws in ways that are sometimes hilarious, sometimes touching, and always entertaining. It's the perfect example of how even the most ridiculous show can find surprising depth in its characters. Glenn Quagmire is, without a doubt, one of Family Guy's most complex characters. He's an outrageous pervert, a loyal friend, a cat lover, and a surprisingly devoted family man all rolled into one Hawaiian shirt-wearing enigma. Over 20 years, he's gone from a one-note sex joke to one of the most developed and, dare I say, compelling characters on the show. He's not perfect, far from it, but it's that mix mix of flaws, humor, and unexpected depth that makes him so memorable. Love him or hate him, Quagmire's unique evolution is proof that even the wildest characters can surprise us. And if you want to surprise yourself with another deep dive, don't miss our episode on how Brian Griffin ruined Family Guy. We break down Brian's rise and fall, exploring how the show's formal moral compass became one of its most polarizing characters.